All right, we are going to get started. Welcome, everybody. We're so grateful that you chose the topic of trauma and to be in sort of this trauma sandbox with us for about an hour and at least till an hour and 15 minutes, right? Till 11:45. Dr. Lisa Katzman and I are presenting together. I'm going to introduce myself. Then Lisa's going to introduce herself, and then we'll share with you what we're doing today. I'm Julie Kurtz. I am the CEO and the founder for the Center for Optimal Brain Integration. I'm the author of 5 books on early childhood trauma, and one that's coming out through Harvard Education Press called Reducing Stress in Schools for pre-K through 12th grade educators. So 5 on early childhood trauma, I think, and one that's coming out in February, but that's available on pre-order through Harvard. And I have 2 award-winning children's books on. Oh, she's modeling the book in the back. Thank you for modeling one of the books in the back. That's so kind of you, Vanna. I appreciate you. And I am going to tell you more about myself along the way, but I'm going to hand it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. We are so excited to see a full room. We thought, okay, maybe there'll be 5 people. Who knows? My name is Lisa Katzman. I'm a pediatric physical therapist, and early intervention is my true love. So that's what I do most of the time. I'm also an authorized trainer for COBE in a bunch of different modules, and I'm the person responsible for putting together the module about the intersection of disabilities and trauma. So welcome. We're glad you're here.
And we, Dr. Lisa Katzman and Winona Elms, who are one of our authorized trainers through the Center for Optimal Brain Integration, also known as COBE. We have training of trainers on our modules. Because of their expertise, they co-created this module for COBE, but also train on it outside of COBE, because when you're an authorized trainer, few of you are going through our authorized trainership right now in the room. Raise your hand if you are. See, we've got a couple people that are in our TOT now wanting to become authorized on one of our modules. So this is the intersection of trauma and disabilities. It doesn't matter what ages you work with. It doesn't matter what humans you work with. This is going to be good for all kids, but we are going to spotlight the intersection today. So when I was a little girl, I used to have this recurring nightmare over and over that this invisible ghost-like man would be chasing me around my standalone garage, which was really scary under the age of 6. And every time I had this recurring nightmare, I knew I was in the nightmare, but I couldn't get myself out of it. Have you ever had a nightmare like that where you're in it, but you can't get out of it? And I thought if I just screamed, someone in my family would wake me up from it. So every time I screamed, I would look like this, and no voice would ever come out. And I know now at the age of 57 that that was my trauma, is the inability to have a voice, which you can't anyhow if you're under 6, but it's difficult to have a voice when you've experienced trauma. And so because of that, our goal today in the trauma gym, which is sorry, you have to be in the trauma gym with us for an hour and 15 minutes. It's working out not your biceps, not your quads, not your abs. It's working out a different muscle. And that muscle is giving every child and adult a voice. How do we do that? One of the ways we do that, because I know that my recurring nightmare was symbolic of my trauma, right? At the age of 57, I know that. I knew that before that. But see, when we are faced with any human, children, each other, people at Walmart, people on the freeway that you encountered this morning, who have dysregulating, puzzling, confusing behavior, we always almost have the voice, "What's wrong with you?" Which is totally normal. If you're human and you're in survival, to protect yourself, you stop at the voice, "What's wrong with you?" The problem is the trajectory of our behaviors that come from this voice is usually punishing, blaming, shaming, criticizing, exclusionary discipline, and other things that cause more stress and more dysregulation. Now, the second voice we're going to work out today is what happened to you. Now, what happened to you is the book that Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry wrote on the bestseller list. It's that voice that allows you to have more empathy. I call it the trauma-informed voice. The first one I call trauma-inducing, the second one trauma-informed. The third one is coined the term by Sean Ginwright out of Oakland, which is creating a trauma-responsive and healing-engaged system, organization, individual, program, classroom, inclusion classroom. What is your behavior communicating? See, this takes it from the general empathy to the action of, I see your behavior is communicating something, and I am going to look at you individually So people will come up and ask me all the time, why does this child bite? And I'll say, I have no idea. There's no generic answer. I'd have to observe the child, look at the child, and try to start to guess, what is the child communicating? They're biting to engage with play, or they're biting to keep people away from them, or they're biting because they have a big emotion. So learning the meaning of the behavior is where we begin to become trauma responsive and healing engaged. Now, this is harder to do than you think, because I know for a fact, I have this story that stood out in my head when I burnt my husband's pancakes one breakfast years ago when my kids were 7 and 8. They're adults now. And I purposely burnt his breakfast and delivered my kids their fluffy white pancakes. And I purposely flushed the toilet when he was in the shower, because in our house, in the shower, flushing goes ice cold. Now, you might be looking at me saying, why did you hire her to be a trainer if she does these things like this, challenging behaviors? But see, this represents all of us. All of us have dysregulated behaviors when our emotions take over, our hind survival brain becomes hijacked, and we react in ways that stop at the voice, what's wrong with you? Now, your hind survival brain is in between your mouth and the base of your neck. And this hind survival brain, when you leave today, you're going to go, thank you, hind survival brain. I had no idea how much you do for me. Why? Because how many of you felt hunger this week? Okay, you're like, that's a dumb question. Yes, I have felt hunger. Well, thank your hind survival brain for giving you the sensation of hunger so that you'll eat so you live longer. You don't have to raise your hand this time, but how many of you were tired this week? Of course, probably all of you. That's your hind survival brain making you yawn, making you feel weak, making you feel a little tired, so you sleep so you live longer. And when you took those cookies that you baked out of the hot stove and your pinky touched the hot pan, it immediately dilated your pupils, your blood pressure went up, your body temperature increased, and it mobilized all the sensations to your hands to pull your hand away to save your life. This is the life-saving part of our brain. It's responsible for 3 F words. Does anybody know what one of the F words is? Fight, flight, freeze. Now, we've got more. We've got fawning, extreme people pleasing at the expense of your own needs. And the other day, my husband was working in the yard and he didn't listen to the cues that his hind survival brain gave him. Thirst, dehydration. He walked into the house and he said, I just woke up with my face was planted in the grass. He fainted. Because see, the hind survival brain gives you a stomach ache as a gift to say, we are having a lot of stress right now, and the only way that I can communicate in the language that I speak is to give you a stomach ache. And you go, I'm just going to take a Tums. And your hind survival brain says, oh, no, you didn't just take that Tums. You're not listening. So I'm going to give you a bigger stomach ache. And you're like, I'm going to take 2 Tums. And it's like, you're not listening. I'm going to put some diarrhea in there because you're just not paying attention. If you still don't listen, I'm going to put blood in it so you go to the doctor. Because see, ultimately, the goal is life-saving. I'm going to give you these symptoms and I'm going to make them bigger because it's the only way that I can communicate that we have stress, that I need you to balance that stress. Okay, now, this is the life-saving part of our brain, but it's also responsible for the generic fight, flight, freeze we're going to refer to today. Great if it's an earthquake, not so great if you're mad at your husband and you burn his pancakes. Okay, so great if there's an earthquake, not so great if we have to act in humane ways that are going to be harmful to others, ourselves, or things around us. But let's go up to the limbic brain in between your mouth and your eyes. This part of the brain speaks a different language. Feelings is one of them that you can all relate to. Calm, small, medium, and large feelings. Great. But you want to know what else it's responsible for? Neurobiologically, we are wired to need to be included, to have significance, to have belonging, and to have a tribe. Because see, we don't have a lot of weapons as a human. We don't have claws, I don't have good fangs, and I'm not very fast. So one of the protections that we have as humans is to be a part of a tribe. We join tribes so we belong, so it buffers our stress. And when we perceive, if anyone, I bet somebody in the audience was saying, why did you burn your husband's pancakes? Because see, we were raising 2 kids, we worked full time and we weren't spending any time together. And what happens in your brain when you start to perceive that you're not loved, you don't belong, whether it be in a classroom, whether it be in your relationship, whether it be at work, your emotions rise up. And when your emotional buttons are pushed by somebody, or you don't feel you belong, or you have high levels of stress in the limbic brain, something happens. Do you see this black button in the middle of the limbic brain? All of you have a built-in smoke detector in your brain. And that smoke detector is yoked to your emotions and your relationships. And when you have high levels of stress, emotional buttons pushed, this alarm goes off. And you want to know what the job description of the amygdala is? To send smoke signals 1,000 miles an hour to the fight, flight, freeze brain. So when you have high stress, when your kids have high levels of stress, the alarm will go off and their fight, flight, freeze brain will wake up. Now, this is the downstairs brain. Let's go up to the top of the brain. The prefrontal cortex is only humans have. See, we share this with mammals and this red part with reptiles. This only humans have, this complex thinking, focal attention, when you get that IKEA table with 500 parts without losing it, the ability to have empathy for someone else, the ability to have self-regulation, the ability to problem solve for the greater good. Is this part of our brain? How many years does it take to develop this? An average of 25. If you have no trauma history, that knocks 70% of us. And that's just according to the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, that 70% of us, by the time we reach 18, have experienced one trauma. 50% of kids in the United States under the age of 6 have experienced trauma. This is all pre-pandemic data, with the expulsion rates being the highest in preschool, 250 kids per day in this country. Now, that's because they have immature brains, and it takes an average of 25 years if you have no trauma history, no special needs, no developmental delays, no mental health vulnerabilities. And you were raised by parents that cast the spotlight of attention on the universe that lives inside of you and taught you how to identify feelings, how to regulate feelings. And so basically none of us have mature brains, right? So this is a really good foundation to show us that all children will have dysregulated behavior, and our job is to teach, not punish. But we want to introduce you to trauma. And we want to introduce you to the difference between social emotional curriculum and trauma-related curriculum. And so the brain is really important because we're going to go back to that, and we're going to recognize that trauma memories are stored inside of the hippocampus, and all of our memories actually, which sort of is housed in the limbic brain. And all of our memories are stored there. So when I said I burnt my husband's pancakes, it was because we weren't getting a lot of time together, and I was getting irritated in my inclusion part of my brain and my relational part of my brain. But see, my father never saw me. My father was critical. My father was abusive. So in not spending time with my husband, I'm also having a little bit of a trauma trigger there that I'm not seen, I'm not loved. So this is the way it works. We're going to get a little bit deeper into that. But I want to introduce you to the 4 things that trigger all human beings based on research that amplify people's stress in their limbic brain and sets off the amygdala. You want to hear what they are? And this is true for kids with disabilities. This is true for you. This is true for me, everybody. Novelty. Anytime we're faced with something new. I had a conversation with somebody about coming to this conference and how exhausting it is because everything is new, finding new things, finding where to park, finding a new place. If that's all new to you, it could be a happy conference, but newness can trigger us. Why do you think so many kids are triggered when they go to Disneyland for the first time? Everything that's new triggers the nervous system, even if it's happy stuff. The second one is unpredictability. If you came to this conference and no one was here to help you, no one told you where to go, you didn't have any signs, unpredictable schedules, unpredictable routines. Okay, events where there's a significant level of unpredictability and constant change elevates our stress. The third one is when we don't have any agency and control in a situation. Like, this is going to be really weird. You're going to be like, why does she talk about this so much? But like, I'm having a colonoscopy coming up in a couple of weeks, and I feel a little bit of the triggering because I feel like I'm not going to have any control when they put me under, right? And so it sort of triggers my trauma memories because trauma leaves you feeling a complete, utter loss of control. And the kinds of things that can trigger you are things that make you feel out of control. So the next one, and this is true for families that we serve, when we don't have voice, when we don't have agency and control, same with kids. And the fourth one is isolation. Welcome to isolation that we all across the globe felt during the pandemic. Isolation also means when I don't feel I belong, When I don't feel I'm loved, when I don't feel I'm valued, I get triggered. Not I meaning all of us, okay? Not having a sense of belonging. Now, the goal is for us to look past the shark fin. Why am I saying this? Because when we see challenging behaviors, this is what we look at, and we stop at the voice, what's wrong with you? And we usually react harshly because their behavior is triggering our emotions, which then trigger our amygdala, which then wake up our fight, flight, freeze brain, which makes us stop at the shark fin and the voice, what's wrong with you? With the trajectory of our behaviors being punishing, blaming, shaming, criticizing, expulsion, even bribing. So the goal is to look past that shark fin to the goldfish and try to explore, what is the meaning of this child or adult's behavior? When my husband got out of the shower, when I flushed the toilet, if he was like, what is wrong with you? Do you think my behavior would get better or worse? It's going to get worse. But if he were to say, honey, I'm an engineer, I'm not good at all this emotional stuff, but I know something's wrong, I might start crying and tell him, right? We're trying to get to the meaning of the behavior. And with trauma, it's usually telling us that they don't feel safe. Okay, so you don't need to know the child's trauma history. You just need to know if there's persistent dysregulation. One possible hypothesis could be a trauma history, even though you don't need to know the history. See, the difference between trauma-related curriculum and social-emotional curriculum is predicated on the fact that your cortex is open for business and you can listen and learn academics or feelings or social-emotional skills to be taught to you. 90% of the time, the cortex shuts down for business when you have stress. And if you have a trauma history, trauma rewires your nervous system to be on high alert all the time, causing you to have long-term physical symptoms, emotional symptoms, mental symptoms, social symptoms, and delays. Because if you are stuck in the middle of an earthquake all day, all the time, you can't think, you can't listen, and you can't learn. So you developmentally become more delayed, emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally. But let's get a formal definition of trauma before I hand it over to Lisa in a few minutes. Trauma is defined by two things. First, trauma is defined by the individual's nervous system, not the event. So 3 kids are adults now, and they all grew up in the same family, okay? And the oldest goes, oh my God, we grew up with rainbows and unicorns. And the middle one was like, half rainbows and unicorns, but half yucky mucky stuff. And the youngest is like, you can't be my siblings. I've been in therapy for 10 years trying to heal from what we went through. See how 3 kids can grow up in the same family and their nervous system define the events differently. Also, different things can buffer your stress, your temperament. Did you have any positive relationships? Were you involved in things that gave you a sense of agency and control? Like I was the oldest child. So my father would come home in a violent rage. One of the things that I would do was go take care of my brothers. That's not what a child should do, but I had power in a situation that made me feel out of control. That buffered my stress, as well as playing soccer and softball and being part of a youth group. Those kinds of things make a difference. So finally, feeling safe and in control is an important aspect of coping with trauma. You see, all of us who've been through trauma, unhealed, undealt with, have a nervous system that was rewired on high alert, kind of like from constant stress in our childhood. It turns your nervous system on high alert. And when your nervous system's on high alert, it's like you're in an earthquake or a tornado all the time. Imagine being in an earthquake and tornado all the time. Your thinking brain shuts down, your feeling brain shuts down, and just your survival brain is awake. And when your survival brain is awake, you are scanning for danger all the time. And you also develop an inner narrative that people are not safe and the world is not safe. So imagine walking through the world, people are not safe, the world is not safe. I would feel out of control every second. If I feel out of control, I start to develop behaviors. The behaviors often look like over-controlled or under-controlled behaviors. Over-controlled are people that have an inner narrative that have experienced traumatic stress, and their inner narrative feels out of control, so they develop over-controlling behaviors, meaning perfectionistic. I have to control other people's behavior. I have to control my own behavior. I need everything to be in order. I need everything to be perfect. Or I need to control other people. which often happens in domestic violent relationships where the perpetrator needs to be in control of everything, but really feels out of control all the time. Some children and some adults build behaviors that are out of control, meaning they go from zero, instead of over control, they're under control. They go from 0 to 100 in a second over the littlest things. You see, what a trauma trigger is a man fought in the war in his 50s. Now in his 20s. And now he's 50, walking his fluffy white dog down the street, and a car backfires a block away. The sound of the car backfiring triggers a past stored memory in his hippocampus, telling his amygdala, we're in danger again, we're back there. And the amygdala sends signals. And it's no different than an emotional button being pushed or a trauma trigger. But he dives under the park bench and starts shaking. And the neighbors look out the window, what's wrong with you? So we have to remember that what a trauma trigger is something uneventful in the present moment through one of our 5 senses that triggers a past memory that makes us feel like we're back in the trauma again, and our body literally is transported to the past. Again, you don't need to know the trauma history, but I'll say one more thing before I hand it over to Lisa, is one of the things we're going to talk about today is how to help nervous systems feel safe. So the difference between an SEL curriculum and a trauma-related curriculum is trauma strategies are about navigating the nervous system to feel safe so that the cortex opens for business. And while I slowly walk it over to Lisa, I'm going to give you one more piece of data. 90% of the time, the cortex shuts down under stress. Imagine having a trauma history, and this is closed all the time. Let's hand it over to you.
Thanks, Julie. So we're going to pivot a little bit and start talking about the intersection of trauma and disabilities. So the first thing that's important to know is that traumatic stress, especially when it's over long periods of time, can lead to changes that are usually negative in learning, behavior, and physical health. That's important because any child that you work with who has a disability and also has a trauma history is likely to be having those two things negatively impacting each other. The changes can place children and adults at risk for further trauma. We'll learn a little bit more about the specifics of that later on. And individuals with developmental disabilities, you probably know this from your work, they're at much higher risk for abuse and neglect in general. So that's something for us to really be thinking about as we go along. Okay, so let's talk for a minute about children with disabilities and developmental delays and how they start their lives. That's part of what puts them at such high risk for trauma. And some of the things that happen to them are that they have very high incidences of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And part of the reason that that happens is because many of them start their lives in the neonatal intensive care unit. Some of the children that I've worked with in early intervention have spent 1 month, 2 months, up to a year in the NICU. And all of those experiences are not positive, and some of it comes with them in the form of trauma. They also experience acute and/or medical traumas, right? So many of them have to undergo procedures and testing and all kinds of things that we would wish they didn't have to endure, but that's part of what happens to these little guys and girls. And sometimes children experience trauma because of poorly integrated health systems, and that affects their whole family. Sometimes it goes far beyond that, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later. If you have a question or a comment, feel free to let us know, and would you please let me know if anybody's got comments online? Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about some of the statistics. The statistics are really serious and can feel a little bit depressing. So if it gets to you and you need to get up and walk around, you need to take a breath, feel free to do that. So children with disabilities and developmental delays are at higher risk for trauma for a lot of different reasons. One reason is that they're 2 times as likely to experience emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. That's very frightening to me to think about that. They're also 3 times more likely to be exposed to domestic violence, even worse than that, and 4 times more likely to be victims of crime. I think I'm missing some. There we go. They're more likely to experience traumatizing physical restraint and seclusion. I'm sure that you think and talk about that a lot in your work, right? Because sometimes we think we're doing it for the safety of a child when in fact we're restraining them unnecessarily. They have much higher rates of serious injury when you compare them to their non-disabled peers. And they're at increased risk for psychological stress due to medical procedures, because the children who spent all that time in the hospital or in the NICU are not done with the medical care and the procedures and all the testing and everything else that they have to go through in their lives. Is pretty intense. Lots of doctor's visits, lots of visits with specialists. But the good news is that trauma is not a life sentence, because we can intervene at any age and in any stage. And because of the brain's neuroplasticity, change can happen at any time in the lifespan. I find that really, really encouraging. And I've experienced it myself. Healing can be induced through use of trauma responsive practices, and we're going to be talking about a lot of those today. Okay, so let's launch into the first big section of things that you can do to intervene. And again, I think Julie mentioned before, we don't really need to know whether someone actually has a trauma history, because trauma responsive practices are so effective for anybody, for everybody. They're just generally supportive. Who doesn't want to feel safe and nurtured? If you think about it in those terms, it kind of makes a lot of sense, right? Okay, so I think this part is really, really cool. Long-term and enduring changes to neural networks can be created by an intense period of stimulation that lasts less than a minute. So you don't have to spend all day with a child or an adult who's experienced trauma to make a really big difference. And if the intense experience is repeated 4 times within an hour, the change is maintained long-term. Doesn't that make you want to go out there and spend 4 minutes a day with everybody who needs that kind of support? I mean, it's so profound that it can have this kind of impact with so little time. And traumatic experiences can alter a life in an instant, but so can these positive relationship building interactions. And you have the power to do that through every day, through your work, and through every interaction that you have with the children you serve. You mean an example of an intense traumatic experience? Oh. An intense healing experience is intense, not because it necessarily is really huge, but because it's really deeply felt by the recipient, I think is probably a better way to think about it. So if you really connect with someone and you really feeling each other, and they feel your love and your support and your compassion for them, I don't think it takes very long to get that sense and internalize it. So that's what we're talking about here. Does that make sense? Do you have anything to add?
It just needs to be perceived by the person as I'm loved, I'm valued, because healing comes from the bottom of the brain up. And so the hind survival brain needs to perceive that I feel safe with you.
And instead of punishing them, using restorative communication or an impact statement or something like that. It's a concrete example.
That's a great example. So you choose to use a different interaction with them. And rather than being punitive, you're supportive, and you're actually thinking in your own head, what does this mean to me? What are they trying to tell me? I'm going to find out so that I can give them what they're actually looking for. And that is often more effective than punishment. Hey, was there another question? I thought I saw another hand. No? Okay. All right, so let's talk about attachment for a brief minute. Does everybody love this picture? I love this picture so much. Okay, so children develop a sense of safety and attachment through, guess what? Nurturing and responsive relationships. Now, not everybody has that at home. So some of the children that you work with are going to be getting that from their relationship with you. That's really, really important to remember. You don't need to know what's going on at home. You can have a nice nurturing relationship with any child anytime you choose to put the energy into that, right? Safe, predictable environments are really important. Julie was talking about that before. We're going to keep talking about it as we move along here. We're going to be talking about environments later. And positive interactions with their primary caregivers. So sometimes those primary caregivers are parents or other adults at home, and sometimes those primary caregivers are their teachers, right? They're babysitters, whatever adult is in their life and having an impact on them. What happens when attachment's disrupted by trauma? Think about that for a minute. As Julie mentioned before, children's brains and bodies become oriented towards stress. And what we mean by that is that our bodies, the body of someone who's experienced trauma assumes they're in danger all the time. And so they spend a lot of time on high alert. Their nervous systems are rewired and they feel unsafe. They feel like they're constantly in danger and they spend a lot of time scanning the environment for that possible danger. And their sense of trust and ability to build relationships is negatively impacted. Recovery from trauma is the most successful within the context of healing relationships, and that's why we spend so much time in the trainings that we do on relationships, because that can make or break things for any given child or adult. Having that deep relationship. So if you've been harmed in the context of a relationship, it's important to remember that the healing is going to happen within the same kind of context, in a healing, nurturing relationship where the child or adult experiences unconditional acceptance. Yeah? Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Julie. Any questions?
I really appreciate your question, and we want to encourage them, and we're going to have a couple of opportunities to talk at the tables and also report out or talk if you're on Zoom. You know, we talked about how the brain heals from the bottom up, because when a baby's born to the planet for the first time, their hind survival, that red part, is alive and well, the most woke part of the brain. And what happens is they have to have an adult in their life, who provides nurturing, responsive caregiving and safe, predictable environments. If they have that, that baby develops an inner narrative or a nervous system that says, whew, the world is safe and people are safe. Now, at the age of 2 years old, my limbic brain can wake up. What is the limbic brain responsible for? Emotions. And what do we call 2-year-olds? Terrible twos. Because around the age of 2, if you had safe, nurturing environments and predictable caregivers, or reverse that, the limbic brain now says, I can wake up developmentally, I can grow. The brain can grow from the bottom up. Then I am a terrible twos because my emotions woke up for the first time. Our job description now as an adult becomes teach them emotions and teach them how to calm their emotions. And then it takes approximately 25 years till that cortex really comes online. So trauma disrupts that. And when children, you or I, whether we have a trauma history, special needs, developmental delays, it doesn't matter. If they go into fight, flight, or freeze, we are now going to practice how to bring in that nurturing, responsive relationship. Because we can talk all we want about relationships are the #1 way to heal, but what if a kid's spitting in your face? What if they're destroying property? That's the hardest time to bring in the nurturing, responsive relationship. So what we're going to give you are 1, 2, 3 concrete strategies of evidence-based things you should do that are also called trauma-responsive strategies to help the nervous system feel safer so the cortex opens for business. At the end of that, I'd like to just offer you a few minutes just to chat at your table, to surface questions, or if you're on Zoom with us, to be able to type your questions in the chat box. So, evidence-based strategies, by the way, you're going to go home and you're going to use this with your partner, spouse, your colleagues, your children, and yourself when you're triggered. And it doesn't need to know whether it's a trauma trigger or not. You just know the person's in fight, flight, or freeze because they can't access their cortex. Okay. Evidence-based strategies. So jot notes down in preparation for a few minutes to talk at your table, or take a photo, but you also have access to the PowerPoint as well. Okay. Remember, you're in the presence now of a very dysregulated nervous system that's either in fight, flight, or freeze. Everything you do has to calm the amygdala and calm the downstairs brain. So you got to speak that language. How do you speak the language? If I give each of you a baby right now that's crying, what would you do to calm the baby? Just yell it out. You don't need to raise your hand. Shh, 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 shh. Hold it. What else? Rock it. Talk. Well, okay, when you talk to the baby, would you say, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about? Or would you say, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Ah, higher pitched voice and soothing tone. So you're going to go, oh, mamacita bubala, I know, honey, baby, really weird, right? You're not going to do that with your partner, spouse, or colleague, or they think you're weird. But the same strategies we use with infants, because an infant, when they're born, is living in the hind survival brain. The way we calm the hind survival brain is by tone of voice, facial expressions, rocking, humming, singing. By the way, I just gave you the hint of what all three of these slides say. Okay. Being still using minimal words. See, what shuts down for business 90% of the time when you're in fight, flight, freeze? The cortex, the ability to listen, to think, and to learn. Stop using all these words. Stop telling kids to use their words. They can't. Especially if you have a trauma history because of the way the trauma memories are stored non-verbally. But if I'm still with you, you can borrow my calm to calm your nervous system. If I'm frantic, you don't have any lighthouse to borrow someone's calm. And children who live in immature nervous systems need someone else to calm them. Let them borrow your calm. The other research shows that if you slow down your words and you extend the end of your word, not in a weird way, not like hello, again, weird. What you're going to do is you're going to be like, we're okay. I got you. You're safe. See, there's just a slowing of the words and an extending of the end of your syllables that automatically send a message to the nervous system to calm. Your facial expressions, your nonverbal body cues, if you're going to use any words at all, just speak to the amygdala. Not use your words. Why'd you do that to your friend? The amygdala doesn't speak that language. You're going to say something like, you're safe. There's nothing dangerous. I got you. We're going to get through this. I'm here for you. Anything that the amygdala will say, oh, thank God somebody is here for me to help me get out of this hell that I'm in right now, right? You need one person that's calm to say, I'm not scared of this thing that you're feeling. I'm big enough, strong enough, and kind and wise enough to help you find a safe place. Avoid abandonment. The number one thing we do in this country is ignore them. They're trying to get attention. I'm going to tell you right now, I burned my husband's pancakes to get attention. See, the brain will resort to challenging behaviors if it doesn't get what they need. You will burn your partner's pancakes. You will yell at them if you're not getting attention. So we can't ignore a child with an immature nervous system in distress. We have to help their nervous system calm so the cortex opens, and then we can help them think and reason after they're calm. Match their level. When an adult comes over to a child, what's happening over here? I can't walk past this line or no one on the camera will see me. So what's happening over here? You're hovering. The amygdala goes danger, 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 big person danger, even if you're not dangerous. So we want to try to make ourselves smaller if we can. That's another way to help the amygdala feel safer. Okay. Slide number 2, we call use bottom-up techniques instead of problem solving. Bottom-up techniques are the soothing techniques that will calm a nervous system, not talking, not problem solving because the cortex is shut down. Sometimes that's going for a walk. Sometimes that's humming and singing. We're going to get to that in just a moment. Sometimes it's going to a safe place. Think of yourself when you're in fight, flight, freeze. Some of you get freaked out when someone comes up and tries to hug you, and some of you want to be, please, I need people. Some of you are like, I need to get away from all humans, right? So sometimes we need a safe or calming area we can go to. Sometimes when we get triggered, we have so much energy in our body that we need to walk, and we need to move, and we need to push, and we need to climb. So we need places in the classroom that allow kids to expel big body energy, not to sit still, and other kids need you to sit with them, or they need to hide. All of us are immediately scanning for a person, place, object, and activity that will help us feel safe. If we can't find one, we will go into distress and throw tables. But if we help kids find the things that will help their nervous system feel safe, in other words, we do earthquake fire drills, we never do emotional emergency drills with kids. What do I do? How do I notice when my nervous system is dysregulated? What do I do to calm my nervous system so that I don't hurt others, myself, or the things around me? My job is to keep you safe. The last one is really about the most common nervous system regulatory strategies are somatosensory activities or bottom of the brain activities Dr. Bruce Perry calls repetitive somatosensory. And what that is the same as rocking and humming. It involves movement, music, water, Play-Doh, kinetic sand. It might be humming, rhythmic activities, rocking, drumming, swaying. It could be going in a hammock. Anything that accomplish the body having movement and rocking, motion, music, humming, singing, breathing activities, bottom of the brain strategies, nonverbal. So just offering you a minute. I know that's not long enough, but this is a time-dated training. This is an all-day training, by the way, that we're giving it a very short spotlight. And so we just want to give you a minute to surface questions or comments to each other, but we're going to bring you back in just 60 seconds. Okay? We'll see you in 60. Sorry, I was a minute over last time. I didn't realize it because I'm looking at that clock and trying to see it. And then I got here and I was like,
I'm right on time.
okay,
Fine.
okay. And this goes to, mine goes to 11:30. Okay. Or 11:30, right? Is that right?
Oh yeah, sorry.
We're okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I know. 15 seconds to close out your sentence you're in the middle of. Okay, good. Okay, good. All right, we're going to slowly bring you back. I'll ring my chimes. I know it's not long enough. You'll have another breakout very soon, too. I'm going to start with the Zoom folks. Are there any comments, Beatrice? Not yet, but you'll cue me if there are. Okay. Are there any ahas, questions, comments so far about anything? If you have a comment, you can say it and I'll repeat it for the Zoom online audience. Yes. You're with preschoolers. Okay. Okay. She's saying that when a child is in distress, to the people who are online, that a lot of times adults would say, "You're okay." And that's a pet peeve of yours. Yes. Yes. So I think first thing I want to say is that we have to find what's going to help the nervous system feel safe. If we say, yes, and technically you're okay. No, I'm not okay. Can't you see I'm in distress? I'm having a trigger and I feel out of control or unsafe. But so technically, yes. But everything has to be filtered through what is the individual nervous system is going to need to feel safe. So sometimes you're going to try something. For example, there's a foster child who'd been through like 5 or 7 foster care placements before they were adopted by 2 moms. And they came to our training, our trauma training, and they're like, oh, Julie said, and Dr. Lisa Katzman said, the number one way to help a child feel safe is the relationship. So let's go over and hug Jeremy. And Jeremy would get triggered because adults represent taking me away. I don't feel safe with adults. So then they were like, would you like to go to our safe zone in our calming area? But that triggered him because it caused him to feel like the memory of being sent away. So the moms came up with this idea of give him the key to our home. And this object, remember we scanned for a person, place, object, or activity that will help us feel safe. He held this key because they said, we can't get home without getting you first. You have the key to our house. This helped his nervous system so much because he looked at this key 1,000 times every day, all day, till he started to feel safe with the schedule, in the environment, and with the adults. So I don't know what will help children feel safe when they're in distress. Saying you're okay might, but if it's not working, and I would tend to say something more like, I got you, I'm here for you, I'm not leaving you. Or you're safe here. Maybe here's what we tell you in our trauma training. Maybe something scary happened before, but right now you're safe with me at our preschool, and my job is to keep you safe. Kind of those words tell the amygdala that they're not in danger. Because see, a trauma trigger sends them back to the past. And what we're trying to do is tell them they're here in the present by engaging one of their 5 senses. So for a baby who's crying and you have them go outside and touch the bark of a tree, it's telling their brain, I'm not back in the scary. I'm here in the present. And if you ever watch Super Soul Sunday, Lady Gaga talks about her trauma history and how she gets triggered, and she developed Lady Gaga as a form of dissociation. She uses a piece of ice in the present moment when she's going into freeze and leaving her body, because engaging with kinetic sand or water or something in the present moment tells the amygdala you're not back there with your father. You're here right now and you're okay. But you know what I mean? So I love that question. Thank you. Is there one more question? We'll have time for more in a minute. Lisa talked about relationship being the top way. That means that you're the external Wi-Fi to the internal world of a child's nervous system. See, our training comes in a series, Module 100, to learn the foundations, Module 200 to go deeper, and Module 300 is strengthening adult self-awareness and self-care. Why is Module 300 important? Because the number one strategy to heal trauma is the adult, and the number one thing that adults have difficulty with who are helpers. They have an overdeveloped muscle scanning for everyone else's need and an underdeveloped muscle of scanning for their own needs, taking care of themselves. And an uncared for adult who walks through the door who's already on empty is going to be triggered very easily by behaviors. It's no different than you and me driving on the freeway when someone cuts you off and your emotional gas tank is empty. You're like, oh no, you did not just cut me off. I will destroy you now. But when you're fully regulated, aren't you angelic? You're like, oh, sweetheart, go ahead. We're all brothers and sisters in the world. We have more restored energy. We can deal with challenging behaviors with more reserves without being triggered in our amygdala and going to our fight, flight, freeze brain. And you got 2 reptiles dealing with each other, 2 reptile brains, 2 hind survival brains. So the capacity to soothe myself comes out of 1 billion times of an adult soothing me. If I have a trauma history and I didn't have an adult who soothed me, I'm going to come to your classroom feeling unsafe. I need someone in the world to teach me how to calm my nervous system. And you don't teach by lecturing and shaming and blaming. You don't teach someone who feels unsafe in the world, stop acting like that or I'm going to give you something to cry about. You don't teach them by calling their mother at home and saying they were being bad. You don't even teach them by bribing them, because I'm telling you right now, no one could ever bribe me out of a trauma trigger that I have. I don't care if, well, maybe if it was $1 billion, maybe I'd get out of the trauma trigger, but normally you can't, because it's so rooted. And that's why we need adults that have good knowledge of trauma so they know how to stay regulated so they can help the child find regulation through their calm. And I love this quote from one of our books. Teacher Jeffrey says, I learned the most curious thing in an infant toddler classroom that I worked in. I'm going to summarize it. I learned that if I was in distress, if I had anxiety, more kids in my classroom would have dysregulated behaviors. Why? Because I'm the external Wi-Fi to the internal world of a child. See, especially if you have a trauma history. You want to know what you learn when you have a trauma history? You learn to scan people's faces to decide whether you're safe or not. And you learn to misinterpret faces, right? Because you're not sure. And so if I'm scanning for your face, and the number one way you show stress as a teacher is through your face and your tone and your body language when you're stressed. But I'm gonna tell you right now, I live in an anxious body. It's genetic, and I have a trauma history. I'm not, like praising it. I'm just telling you the truth. But I sat in a meeting once, and at the 10-minute break, someone came up to me and said, "Can I touch you?" And I was like, "Yeah, but why?" They said, "Can I borrow, I just need to borrow some of your calm." And I was like, "Can you text my husband? He will never believe that someone said that about me, because he's the calm one and I'm the more," but see, you can be an anxious body. You can be stressed. You're allowed to, but you have to be aware of how that stress lives in your body and how you can absorb it. So have you ever met someone where you got the EBGBs? That's mirror neurons. Every person you come in contact with, they're absorbing your inner world. That's how powerful mirror neurons are. And especially for children who live in immature nervous systems. We have a photo op. Everybody turn and wave. Thank you. We wanted a better photo than just like the fake ones. Okay. That means teachers also need to develop a muscle called the pause. Dr. Viktor Frankl says that in between when we get triggered and when we react, there's a space in between to choose. And when the amygdala goes off, it sends signals 1,000 miles an hour to your fight, flight, freeze brain and only 1 short mile an hour up to your cortex. If you don't cultivate the muscle of a pause, the ability to pause, you'll react with children harshly. You'll react to the shark fin, you'll react with the voice, "What's wrong with you?" Now, we're opening up chapter 2 in the, 25 minutes we have left. Environments are important too. Environments, I feel like I need to give a good pose. Okay. Sorry, I was distracted. Okay, now I won't look anymore. But I want to lead to an activity that will take us till approximately 11:30, where Dr. Lisa Katzman will close us out. The environment is really important, and we have 100,000 different things, but we chose a few slides, and one of them is 6 environmental strategies that can calm the nervous system. Because if you are a navigator of children's nervous systems and you want all the children in your classroom to be calm, so their cortex opens and they can sit in circle and they can have academics and they can learn social emotional, then you need to have relational strategies, but you need environment strategies that naturally calm nervous systems. Let's go over the 6 and give you just a minute or so to chat about it and to surface your questions and comments. Are there any questions from Zoom yet? Okay, great. Visual is the first one. Now, some of us calm by dimming the lights, but some of us calm by turning the lights on so we can scan for danger. Some of us calm by reducing all the clutter. I don't know why people design classrooms to be bright red, bright yellow, bright blue, with pictures all over the classroom and things hanging. You see, visual clutter can stimulate a nervous system. Also, not knowing where to find things. But being able to scan for a safe place, a safe person, a safe object, a safe activity. And that's visually. If I can scan for those things, I have a pathway to safety. If I can't find anything that will help me feel safe, I will flip this table, spit in your face, and punch somebody. Visual schedules we'll talk about, but visual schedules are just a way from what the conference has a visual schedule. I have the visual schedule on my name badge. Every time we know what's coming and what's happening, we feel safer. Nature in the classroom, nature outdoors calms children. Animals in the classroom, visuals that tell me what to expect. The next one is auditory. Some of you calm from music, some of you walk through the world humming. You're naturally calming yourself. But calm, you said calm vocal tones, that does it. White noise machine, nature sounds, being able to go to a quiet area. For some kids, being able to go to a louder area. Yes, question. Yes. They have a student that's constantly humming and singing. That is That's a child who uses that strategy to calm their nervous system, which when you go to your breakout for a minute, one of the things you're going to think about is you're going to think about, what do we already use? What are we missing? Or even, what do we use for ourselves? And kids that surface like this, who's humming to calm their nervous system. I love that. Tactile. Some kids in your classroom, if you have tactile stuff, will calm from those textured pillows, textured materials, kinetic sand, Play-Doh, water tables, uh, textured stuffed animals and toys. Vestibular is the next one, the vestibules in your inner ear that when stimulated, calm, not spinning. Spinning activates the nervous system, but just anything like rocking, which involves swaying, bouncing, swinging, walking, any kind of movement, running, riding toys, hammocks. Proprioceptive is my biggest one. Anything that gets you deep pressure into your joints. I'm a walking maniac. I walk a lot because I think I learned walking and exercises give me deep pressure into my joints, which calms my nervous system. And that's true with blanket burritos and yoga and jumping, running, climbing, weighted balls. But your classroom should have a lot of things that are like heavy lifting tires, heavy weighted balls from the gym, heavy things to push, handprints on the wall to push. Because a lot of kids need to do big body movement. You know, Black boys are expelled at a 500% rate than any other child. And there's a great article, if you want it, called Black Boys in Kindergarten. And I think this applies to all kids. It's by J. Luke Wood out of UCLA. And he said, Black boys are big body learners, body kinesthetics. But I think this is true for all kids. And the data shows that in preschool classrooms, on average, through this article, only 8% of the time do we do big body movement. J. Luke Wood. And you can email me on the PowerPoint. My email is at the last slide. So is Dr. Lisa Katzman's, and we'll send you the article. I'm telling you, big body movement is one of the big things missing from preschools, which is why we have so many challenging behaviors. Oral. I'm sorry, but a lot of kids chew to calm their bodies. And you might say to them, we're not babies, you shouldn't be chewing on things. But kids get kicked out of preschool because they can't regulate their bodies because they don't have anything to chew on, or talk about their problems, or use breathing activities. There are two that are missing from here that we do in our module 200 going deeper. One of them is nature, and the other's olfactory, smells, like scented erasers or scented stickers or scented jars. But I would just like to give you the gift of time, a minute again, to do surface questions and talk with one another about your ahas. I'll see you in about 60 seconds. Oh, and it's one of your handouts too, these 9 activities. Thank you for reminding me. I'm gonna have time to do it now. Exactly. Yeah, I just thought it was and I argue that a lot of these families are I think I'm going to give them 15 seconds to come back now. Yeah. 15 more seconds to close your sentences. 15 more seconds. Thank you. We'll slowly come back. We have room for maybe one question, but I'm going to prioritize the online Zoom people first. Are there any Zoom comments? It's okay. I don't want to ignore them. So I love you all online too. I don't want to ignore you. And we have room for maybe one comment or question. Or aha that you noticed about yourself or others, or maybe insights we didn't share. Yes. For dysregulation. So they asked, what advice do you have for a coworker who's dysregulated, right? The exact same fight, flight, freeze slides. But I will say one thing. If you're on a team where folks are at each other's throats or critical of each other or have differences, it's no different than two parents that don't get along. It causes a lot of anxiety for children. This is one of the hardest things if you have teachers that don't have a common goal of trauma responsive strategies, social emotional strategies, and teachers who are also frequently dysregulated because they haven't built a lot of self-awareness and their own self-regulation strategies. And then teachers, they're at each other's throats or, hurt each other. It's going to cause a lot of disruption to the environment of the classroom safety. So thank you for surfacing that. Lisa, I'm going to hand it over to you to kind of close us out to the very end.
Okay. Let's talk about some environmental strategies. You may be using some of these already, and so hooray for you, because it's not just good for children who have experienced trauma, but it can be great for kids with disabilities and those who haven't experienced trauma as well, right? So we want to be thinking about establishing safe zones and safe spaces in the classroom whenever we can. It doesn't need to take up a lot of space. But this is important because, as Julie and I have mentioned a few times, people who've experienced trauma need to feel safe. And part of that is us helping them figure out what person, place, activity, or object works for them, right? And it's going to be different for each person. We don't know what that is until we discover it or they tell us what works for them, right? So we want to be thinking about that. Calming areas, more about that. So the purpose of a calming or safe area is so that children can get to a point where they're able to self-regulate again, especially if they've been triggered by something in the environment or an interaction with another person. It could be any of those things, right? So we want to be thinking about what could we offer them that would be helpful. And again, it's going to be different for every individual person is going to have a different type of need. So we want to make sure that the space is safe, comfortable. It's a place where they can enjoy themselves, right? Whatever that means for them. It could be. Yeah, it could be. There's no, like Julie said before, there's no single answer to that question. That's something that would require a lot of exploration and kind of trying to figure out, like, what is that coming from? I see that a lot in my work, and there's usually a different origin for every time it shows up, right? So sorry, I can't give you a straight answer. Okay, so sensory materials, feeling words, for naming emotions, we might offer any of those things. And we want to make sure that we're never using those spaces as an area for punishment. Because isolation, guess what? It's a trigger for just about everybody, right? Unless you choose it for yourself, and then it's not isolation because you're choosing it. Okay, materials that you might incorporate into your cozy area, your safe space, your place for people to go who need to self-regulate. You might have a feeling chart, chew toys, a sensory check-in list, something like that, calming books, something to push on, something to pull on. Anything like that can be really helpful. As Julie was talking about before, the deep pressure and sometimes vestibular activities can be really calming, depending upon what they are. Paper to crumple, calming lotion, any of those types of things that are sort of sensory materials that make sense for you in your specific classroom, if that's where you work, and if not, in my case, it would be in someone's home. What would work in this family's home for their specific child? These are some examples of bins and objects to promote regulation. I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see the pictures on the handout, but it shows a bunch of different things, like there's a sand thing for playing in right here. There's manipulatives for moving around. There's timers. There's things to draw with and all kinds of things that you can do with your hands and fingers. And if you're not someone who uses fidgets, you should try it sometime because it works really well. Visual schedules. Julie mentioned this before. Visual schedules are so helpful. They're not just helpful for people who have experienced trauma, but if you work with children with disabilities, this is a really common practice, right? And the best thing about the visual schedule is it's a double whammy because it will help a child with a disability understand what's coming next. And if they have a trauma history, it's going to help even more because it will give them predictability and it will lower their stress levels. And you know what that does? It makes it possible for them to learn. And isn't that why we're with these children, so we can help them learn? And we want to help them have a sense of control over their environment. Julie talked about this earlier. We really want to have a sense that we have some agency in our lives, and that's true for children. It's even more true for children with disabilities because they experience such a loss of agency in their lives in many situations. This is an example of a first then schedule. First, we have group activities, and then we go outside on the playground. But you could use any combination, and depending upon the age of the children that you're working with, you would modify that to make it work. You want to start thinking about making your transitions predictable. This is important for children with disabilities and for those who've experienced trauma both, for the same reasons we've been talking about. So you want to decrease the number of transitions you have during the day, and anything can be a transition. I was in a Head Start classroom yesterday, and the teachers were asking me, what is up with this kid? Like, he cries so much. Well, okay, give me an example. And she said, well, you know, he does okay at nap time, like I'm patting him. He knows I'm going to sit next to him. But then I want to uncover his face to make sure that he's okay before I walk away. And I was like, I think that's a transition for him. I think he's really sensitive to transitions. Can you just leave his face covered and like feel his body or something to make sure that he's breathing instead of uncovering him? Because that seems to be really a trigger for him. You want to provide visual and audio signals if you can. Like Julie used the bells to let us know it was time to come back. That's an example of an audio signal. Individualized supports and cues. What children need is going to depend upon what their function is. Like, do they see well? Do they hear well? Can they respond quickly? Do they need something visual? Do they need something else? Creating rituals is a great thing to do because then children also know what to expect, and they might even start looking forward to the transition because it means they get to do a series of things leading up to the next activity. Here are some transition cue examples showing like when children are waiting in line for something, they can figure out when is it actually going to be my turn. This is an example of auditory transition cues. We talked about that a little bit already. I think there's a lot of different things that you can do with that, and it's going to depend upon what works in your classroom. I worked in a preschool classroom, a Head Start classroom, where the teacher, the site director, would ring a bell when it was time to go outside. And I was personally triggered by the bell. I'd be like, do you really have to ring that bell? And I had a feeling that it was happening for some of the kids as well because their responses were not positive. Environmental cues. So the example here is showing a box where the children would stand. And that lets them know this is your space, this is your friend's space. You get to stay in your box. Now, of course, if we're talking about preschoolers, there's going to be a lot of shuffling and scuffling, right? And that's part of what we're there for. Bless you. Okay, minimizing the number of children at centers. You want to have a sense of how many children can be at this center before things go awry. You want to keep it under that number because then you're just preventing having situations come up that you'll then have to solve later. Okay, it's Julie again.
So as we close out, we want to talk about the why behind this. The why is to help nervous systems feel safer, to feel more regulated. And when they feel more regulated, let's see if you get it all now. What opens for business? I heard a few of you, that's pretty good. The cortex opens for business 90% of the time when we feel safe in the world and we feel calm with the people around us. And breathing is free. You take 17 to 20,000 breaths per day, and you have 10 pounds of muscle around your lungs. And did you know there's a different job description for your out breath than your in breath? The out breath does something different in the in breath. The in breath stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, which is the accelerator of your body. So if you are laying in bed and your friends come over and go, let's go dancing, you're like, I can't, I've just been laying in this bed for 3 years. I can't even get up. The way to get more energy is to take a bunch of in breaths in. Have you ever been in a training and yawned or a meeting? You're yawning to wake your darn self up. You're taking an in breath in. That's the accelerator. But the brakes is stimulating your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the job description of your out breath. So every day when you're calm and regulated and you feel safe, your in breath and your out breath are like the 55 to 70 mile an hour zone. But as soon as you start to panic and have a lot of stress, some of you hold your breath, which creates more anxiety. Some of you start shallow breathing, chest breathing, hyperventilating, which is your breath matching your stress levels. But see, if you learn breathing techniques and you teach children breathing techniques, the adult can calm themselves. Remember the art of the pause? And we can calm children by building in breathing activities throughout the day. Now, the biggest thing I want to share with you about breathing is being able to share with kids. There are a lot of breathing. On our website, the Center for Optimal Brain Integration, we have a book resource, downloadable tool that will show you a lot of book recommendations. Like Breathe Like a Bear is one of them, which gives kids hot chocolate breathing, hot soup breathing, bunny breathing, snake breathing. I also have, did we, Lisa, provide them with a handout of the breathing techniques? Yeah, so 2 of the handouts you have is one of them is the 9 environment strategies that you can take away and practice, but also like 35 breathing activities to use with children that I think if you use throughout the day, you keep them in the optimal zone of regulation. Now, to close, we're going to do a $25 Amazon raffle. This is not on your PowerPoint, so you either need to scan it now or you need to type in www.optimalbrainintegration.com, which is our website. And the way you enter is you scroll to the landing page at the bottom and you enter your email. Now, you're not going to get an email back that says, yay, you entered. It's going to come to my inbox tomorrow morning at the latest. I am going to do your name's in a spinner wheel and pick one of you, and I will email you if you win. I'm going to CC Myra because there'll be accountability. I'll CC Lisa too. And so one person will get a $25 Amazon gift card, and then maybe you can buy some additional supplies for the work that you do. But with the couple minutes that we have left, are there any comments or questions that have been burning for you that you'd want to get answered? Yes. 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 These are the classrooms you're talking about. You're talking about the classroom. Okay. So for the people who are online, the comment that she made was that she's doing a lot of restorative practice training and coaching, going into classrooms that are over visually stimulated, which is why I'm training all across the country on this, because the environment is a part of helping the nervous system feel calmer and safer, having safe spaces to get away, having agency and control, having a voice, all of these things that we can't fit into an hour and 15 minutes, but so important that you brought that up. And a part of our coaching needs to be, that's part of the restorative practice, is calming of the nervous system. Oh yeah. So because you just joined our raffle, our newsletter's coming out, our next newsletter's coming out on Friday, so you'll automatically be a part of that. And I'm highlighting Orange County's well spaces in their elementary schools, and now they're doing middle and high school, and I will be providing tons of resources on what school calming zones and spaces, and a lot of their recommendations and handouts that you'll get in that email. Yeah. And yeah. Plus, this is all of the ways you can stay connected with the Center for Optimal Brain Integration. It's on your PowerPoint. You don't need to worry now. And then this is the book that a lot of this module was based on, Trauma-Informed Practices for Early Childhood Educators, but it's edition 2, not edition 1. You can find it on Amazon. Lisa and I, unfortunately, we're closing now, but fortunately and unfortunately, I have to drive to train virtually at 1 o'clock. So I have very little time after, but you have my email here, and I think you have Dr. Lisa Katzman's on the PowerPoint here. You can contact either of us with questions after this training, or I'm happy to talk with you. And Lisa can stick around for a few minutes. So thank you all. Have a great day and a great conference. We just so appreciate you. Thank you.